When you look at the Raiders defense, how many top 10 players in their position do you expect to see? We'll talk about that plus a lot more on Friday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for August 30th, 2024.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thanks so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available. And as always, if you're checking us out on YouTube, you know we appreciate that. The show continues to grow each and every day, and that's because of your support, Raider Nation, and because of my man, Ari. Ari does a great job each and every day getting us on YouTube. We appreciate him. We shout him out. He's on Twitter at Ari Produces. Hit him up. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And as always, we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Plenty of calls and texts talking about Tom Brady and potential ownership of the Raiders and how that can affect his broadcasting career, talking about the roster as the Raiders continue to tinker with that and mess with the practice squad, and of course just the expectations of the team in general in 2024. Your calls and texts will come up segment number 3. Segment number 2, I want to focus in on the Raiders defense, and I really want to look at how many top 10 players in each position do you think that the Raiders will have? Or when you look at the Raiders defense, how many top 10 guys do you see in their individual position? We know Max Crosby, right? He's going to be a top 5 guy, not a top 10 guy, a top 5 guy, and he might be number 1 when it's all said and done. But who else is going to be that top 10 guy at their position? We'll talk about that. I'll tell you why I'm talking about that. All that comes up in segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, news and notes of the day, as I always have. So just go ahead and let's jump right into it. So we know the Raiders got down to their initial 53-man roster, but we also know they're tinkering with it. They're tinkering with the roster. They're tinkering with the practice squad. They're bringing guys in. They're letting guys go. They're doing a lot right now as they're trying to figure out who the best 53-man roster is to go ahead and take to L.A. to take on the Chargers, and who's the best 16 guys for the active practice squad. So the Raiders made some moves, and they were all practice squad moves on Thursday. So Wednesday, cornerback MJ Devonshire, the 7th-round pick out of Pitt, he was waived along with 3rd-round pick out of Alabama, Byron Young. Byron Young was a 3rd-round pick from a year ago. Both of those guys were waived. My expectations, as I talked about it on Thursday's show, were that they were going to both be signed back to the practice squad. Well, 1 out of 2 is not bad. Right? If I'm playing baseball, I'm hitting 500, and I'm a Hall of Famer. So cornerback MJ Devonshire, he actually did sign back to the Raiders practice squad on Thursday. Again, 7th-round pick out of Pitt. And Costa Mesa at training camp, he had some moments where he flashed. He looked pretty good. He had some moments in preseason where he looked good, but he didn't look good enough. Didn't look consistent enough. AP mentioned it right after the preseason game number 3 against the 49ers. Don't like to put corners out there before they're ready to play. So guys like DK Richardson, MJ Devonshire kind of let it be known that they weren't going to be the guys that they were going to be put out there on the field if they needed it, right? They obviously needed some extra depth at the cornerback position. So MJ Devonshire got waived on Wednesday. On Thursday, added back to the practice squad. As far as Byron Young goes, thought he was going to be added back to the practice squad, but he didn't clear waivers. No, the Eagles actually picked him up claimed him off of waivers, and so they added him to the 53-man roster. So the former 3rd-round pick from Alabama for the Raiders is no longer available for the practice squad. He's now in Philadelphia with the Eagles, and maybe a change of scenery will be good for him. I never root for anyone to fail. I hope all these guys succeed because they're living their dreams, and of course you want them to do really well. He just never was able to pop with the Raiders. Had a moment or two in training camp this past year, he was okay. Had a moment or two in the preseason games where he was okay. And the biggest moment came in preseason game number 3 where he got a sack against the 49ers. So it was too little too late for the Raiders. They waived him. He did not clear waivers. Now he's off to Philadelphia to be with the Eagles. Also, as far as the practice squad goes, the Raiders signed wide receiver Justin Shorter to the practice squad. He was actually a wide receiver by way of the Buffalo Bills. Matter of fact, he was a 5th-round pick of the Bills back in 2023, and his biggest success with the Bills came during preseason play where he had 6 catches on 11 targets for 66 yards and a touchdown, and then during the 2024 preseason, he made 2 catches on 4 targets for 15 yards. He never had a catch in the regular season or postseason at all. But the thing about Justin Shorter, the young man from Florida, the Raiders turned him into a wide receiver or a tight end. He's a wide receiver right now, but they turned him into a tight end. That's what they listed him as when they tweeted it out that they signed him. They signed and they have him at number 88, tight end Justin Shorter, to the practice squad. So he's got the size. He's 6'4". He's got a big frame, so he can put on a little bit extra weight. I'll be interested to see what the Raiders do with him. But again, just adding guys to the practice squad. So if you're keeping track, they're up to 15 guys on the practice squad. And then there was also another move that they made, and this had nothing to do with the practice squad, but they removed Brandon Faison, the cornerback, from IR with injury settlement. So remember, he made the initial 53-man roster. I was surprised by that because he really hasn't been available all, training camp and preseason, just wasn't available. He was supposed to compete with Jacorian Bennett. That didn't shake out because of injury. So he was the guy who initially made the 53-man roster. Tom Telesco said he's been a starter in the league when he's healthy, and then all of a sudden he was put on IR, short-term IR. So he thought, okay, some point this season he'd be able to come back. Well, in fact, he's not coming back to the silver and black because they released him with that injury settlement. So the Brandon Faison experiment with the Raiders is officially over. It's funny, we were at the Intermountain Health Performance Center on Thursday. We were meeting with AP, and before that, someone asked about Brandon Faison. I was like, man, you remember when Brandon Faison was actually a really good corner for the Raiders when they picked him up like mid-season and nobody knew who he was, and quarterbacks threw his way, and he ended up coming up with an interception, a few pass breakups. He was actually pretty good. Then the defensive coordinator, Gus Bradley, ends up going to the Colts when the coaching change happened. He ended up following Bradley to the Colts, and then he makes his way back to the Raiders, and he did absolutely nothing with the Raiders when he made his return. So now he's off to, greener pastures or wherever he can go and flourish, but it won't be with the silver and black. Finally, here in segment number 1, today's Locked On Raiders podcast news and notes. I wanted to go ahead and pass this little soundbite along from my guy Matt Smith from 104.3 The Fan in Denver. He was actually on my radio show, Unnecessary Roughness, on Raider Nation Radio 920 on Thursday, talking about Colorado, the University of Colorado. They were taking on North Dakota State. That was the first game of the season, and we were talking about and just previewing the game and previewing Colorado, what they were going to do this year under Coach Prime, being year 2 and being in the Big 12. But Matt has told me before that he didn't want the Broncos to draft a quarterback in April's draft in 2024 because he wanted them to hold out and wait till Shador was in the draft, and then they can just keep him there in Colorado and draft him. Well, obviously that didn't happen. They drafted Bo Nix. So I asked them straight up. One, I had asked them the expectations for Shador this upcoming season in college, and then we got into the conversation about Shador on the next level. So here's Matt Smith talking about his expectations for Shador when he makes it to the NFL. What do you think Shador would do on the next level? Would he be a guy, or should he be a guy that the Raiders are interested in when the draft comes around in April?
If they're in position, or even if they're like top 15, they should absolutely be interested. I mean it, like, he's a really good college quarterback, but when he gets to the pros around pro talent, it's just going to explode. I mean, he can handle being the face of the franchise. He can handle the media. He can handle the hype. He doesn't, you know what it is about him? He doesn't blink. Like, he's so poised. Even when the game gets down to it, he talks about his Brady mode, right? Well, he's a really clutch quarterback. The only reason they beat Colorado State last year was because of him. They were down 11 in the fourth quarter, and he was brilliant in that fourth quarter. When the moment gets bigger, he tends to meet it. And, from a star power perspective, as somebody who covers the AFC West, Vegas needs that badly. And that is exactly what you get in him. He's the real deal. He's the total package. And he's just got to go prove it officially this year. But, I mean, talk about star power. He's got 2 billboards, giant billboards
yes.
up right now in Times Square.
Yep.
Like, I mean, what are we talking? If you'd have told me 2 years ago when CU finished 1-11 and their average margin of defeat was 29.5. Just let me repeat that. 1-11,
wow.
Average margin of defeat 29.5. That in 2 years their quarterback would have a billboard up in Times Square, I'd be like, stop. Just
right.
stop, please. But no, you're getting the total package. He is, and that's the other thing is Coach Prime always talks about how they have hired all of this NFL experience. I mean, you've got Warren Sapp on staff, Adalius Thomas, Damian Lewis, Pat Shurmur. Their brand new defensive coordinator is Robert Livingston from Cincinnati. He was their safeties coach the last 9 years, working under Lou Anarumo. Shador is getting not only NFL coaching on the offensive side, but he's going up against NFL defensive schemes. And it's interesting, the defensive coordinator, Livingston, talked about how he just talks to Shador and is just blown away with his football IQ. If Shador had any other last name, he wouldn't get half the hate that he got, and he would be getting pushed by everyone as the guy. He's just got to go prove it because of all that other stuff now. So, look, I mean, and they went 4-8 last year. So you got to at least get to. I think if he gets to 6-6, I really believe this, that he'll be number one off the board, because even Elway was, I think, 5-7 his last year at Stanford and went 1 overall. It's less about team success, especially when you can see, like guys like you and I, how bad their offensive line is. They're not losing games because of him.
Right.
So I really believe he's the real deal, Q, and I can't wait for him to go prove it.
So glowing review right there from Matt Smith, again from 104.3 The Fan in Denver, and he says that Shador is the guy that he thinks that should be in Las Vegas. And look, I don't know if the Raiders are going to be in need of a quarterback. I personally think that they will be in the need of a quarterback. I don't think their franchise guy is on the team, but that's neither here nor there. They might decide at the end of the season that, yes, Minshew's their guy or Aiden O'Connell's their guy. That's fine. I'm not trying to talk about the draft right now and all that other stuff. They got a whole season to play. But because he was on my show, I thought I would take an opportunity to go ahead and at least ask him what he thought. And so I thought I'd pass that along as well. And just for S's and giggles, Colorado defeated North Dakota State on Thursday, 31-26, and Shador did have a hell of a game. 26 for 34, 445 yards, 4 touchdowns, and an interception. And that interception was such a fluke. It bounced off the calf of somebody on North Dakota State and bounced into one of their arms in the end zone. So probably could have put up even bigger numbers, but not a bad day one or game one of the 2024 season for Shador Sanders. 26 for 34, 445 yards, 4 touchdowns, and an interception. I've said it before. I got my eyes on him, and I got my eyes on Jalen Milroe to see what they do in college football this season and see what it shakes out for the Raiders and their quarterback situation throughout the course of the season as well. But that's what I got for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, news and notes of the day. Coming up in segment number 2, top 10 players on defense in their position. What do I mean by that? Why am I talking about that? I'll explain it all coming up next in today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before I get to that, though, I do want to tell you about one of our latest sponsors and one of our great sponsors, as far as I'm concerned, here on the Locked On Raiders podcast, and that is 5 Hour Energy. And that's the little shot that you'll see, at the counter at the gas station. I'm a big fan of the grape flavor. I'm really a big fan of the grape flavor. Put it in the fridge for a while if you can. Cool it off, and then boom, take that shot. But really, you can take it any time of day, after a workout, before a workout, on your way to work, after work, whatever the case may be, on a long road trip. I do that sometimes as well. Matter of fact, I did that on my way back when I was driving late night from Costa Mesa back to Las Vegas. And 5 Hour Energy really came in handy for me. And the thing about it is, 0 sugar, is convenient, portable size, the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5 Hour Energy website has flavors galore like watermelon, tropical burst, grape, berry, and more. There's a flavor for everyone. You should try them all. And on the site, you even have the option to build your own 12-pack or 24-pack. You choose the flavors, and it's delivered right to your door. So if you go to 5hourenergy.com, and that's the number 5, 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5 Hour Energy product today, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONFB, LOCKEDONFB, to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid through September 30th. One order cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to talk about the Raiders defense. And when you look at it, what are your expectations? And what I mean by that is guys that are top 10 in their position. I mentioned at the top of the show, Max Crosby is going to be top 5 at his position, defensive end, right? And really, he could be top 1 as far as I'm concerned. There's going to be a day when we come on here and say Max Crosby is the number 1 defensive end in the league. And it very well easily could be this year. But when you look at the rest of the Raiders defense, how many guys do you think are going to be in the top 10 in their respective positions? And honestly, for this defense to be as good as we think it's going to be, how many do they really need? So you're probably wondering right now, Q, where the hell is any of this coming from? Well, we obviously have a bunch of stations on the Las Vegas Sports Network. I'm in charge of all of them. Raider Nation Radio, ESPN Las Vegas, Fox Sports Las Vegas, and, of course, 1230 The Game. So all 4 of those stations I'm in charge of. I'm listening on Thursday morning. I was listening to the Press Box on ESPN Las Vegas with Tyler Bischoff and Ed Graney. Ed Graney is a normal guest on my radio show each and every Monday at 2:30. Does a great job covering the Raiders like a glove. But his co-host, Tyler Bischoff, is a very analytical guy. very big on Pro Football Focus, very big on diving into the numbers, right? I'm not really a numbers guy. I say it all the time. I'm an eye test guy. I believe what I see with my eyes, not what the numbers always tell me. Now, do I respect the numbers in Pro Football Focus? Absolutely. I think it's a good point of reference. I don't think it's the end-all, be-all. But I heard a really good conversation that they were having on Thursday morning, and I thought, you know what? I could turn this into a subject. And really, it's funny, I found myself talking back to the radio while I was driving into work, and that's when I knew that it was a good conversation that they were having. So here's Tyler Bischoff. You'll hear him first. You'll hear a little Ed Graney. But Tyler Bischoff is talking about top 10 players in their position on the Raiders defense and what he had questions about. Check it out.
The question I had is because when I was looking at some of these PFF grades last year for like Darnay Holmes and stuff like that, Crosby was the 4th best defensive end in football by PFF. And you can probably make an argument that he should be higher than that. But outside of that, they only have one other player on the roster right now defensively that was top 20 at his position last year, and it was Robert Spillane, who was the 16th best linebacker. Christian Wilkins, by PFF grades, was only the 29th best defensive tackle last season. Now, the previous 2 years, he was top 10 both seasons. So we're not that far removed from him being a top 10 defensive tackle. Jack Jones, now this is combined because he was in New England and then in Vegas. 33rd best corner in football. I'm expecting him to be better than that.
Yes.
But it's also, he's in his 3rd year. He hasn't played a full season yet. The Patriots did cut this guy. Like, they got rid of him. So he's not, I expect him to be better, but it's certainly not any sort of guarantee that he's a top 10, top 15 corner in the league. And then Malcolm Kuntz was the other guy that had a good grade. He was 22nd best edge rusher. I think there's enough question marks with the starters to wonder how good they're actually going to be.
Really? I don't know if there's that many question marks. And maybe I'm just going on the last half of last year.
Yeah, which they were good.
Which they were really good.
Yeah.
That thinking they can continue that moving forward. Now, and again, it was preseason. I know we don't want to harp on this. They struggled against the run in the preseason.
Right.
Which was a little surprising because they struggled against the run sometimes when their ones were in there.
Right.
That was a little surprising, I thought.
So the reason that I'm not convinced on it is because I'm not sure. Outside of Crosby, I don't know that we can for certain say they have another top 10 guy at his position.
So there you go, right? I mean, Tyler's dropping down the numbers right there. Obviously, Max Crosby, number 4 at his position, and easily could have been a lot higher, and I do expect him to be a lot higher. The number for Christian Wilkins being, a number 29 overall position in his position kind of seemed very low to me, especially since he had 9.5 sacks from the defensive tackle position in 2023. So that seemed a little bit low. But, talking about guys like Jack Jones, talking about guys like Robert Spillane, right? No other guy he's saying on the Raiders defense is a top 10 defender, that would be graded like by Pro Football Focus, like Max Crosby is top 4. So one, I look at it and say, okay, well, as I'm looking at this year's defense, who do I think could be top 10? And then I started thinking about it on the drive in. I was like, wait, do the Raiders even need to have another guy in the top 10? You can have your alpha. You can have your star in Max Crosby. And does anyone else need to be a top 10 if they just do their job? So, that was one of the questions that I had. And I don't believe that you need to. Now, you need to have guys that are obviously good at what they do, but they don't necessarily have to be top 10. Like, you don't have to have a star at every position, right? If you have a star at every position, a lot of times things don't go right? They don't work with each other hand in hand. I think the 1-2 punch of Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins is going to be fantastic. I do think that it would be nice to have another top 10 guy along that defensive line because that's going to make everyone else behind him better. So whether that's Max and Christian, Max and Kuntz, right? Even if Tyree stepped up, I don't think he'll be that guy. But even if Tyree stepped up, if there's another guy along that defensive line that can get close to matching what Max does, that's just going to make the rest of the defense better. From the linebackers to the cornerbacks to the safeties, everyone's going to be better. So when I look at it, I think about the answer to that question. I don't know who's going to be another top 10 guy. I think Max is top 5 easy. Christian Wilkins, Malcolm Kuntz, I think they have a chance to be top 5. Jack Jones, Nate Hobbs, I think they have a chance to be top 10 type guys. Jones, because he's aggressive, because he attacks the ball, he's going to get beat a few times. So Pro Football Focus-wise, he might not be top 10. But if he comes away with 6 or 7 interceptions, even 5, right? He only had 2 last season with the Raiders. If he goes away with 5 or 6 interceptions, takes a couple to the house, That's top 10. That's all I need. You're right. I don't care if it's top 10, top 15. That's all I really need. That production that he has from going after the ball, turning it over, and being that guy. Obviously, some PBUs as well, but he could be that guy. Nate Hobbs, he's really good. He's really aggressive. He's a tough tackler. His biggest thing is just going to be staying healthy. That'll be, as long as he can stay healthy, he'll be just fine. Again, I think I'm comfortable with wherever he slides in because he always does his job. The biggest thing for Nate Hobbs, he's going to have to be available for the course of the season, right? So I guess bottom line, my own answer to the question, and I want to throw it out there to you, and you can think about it over the course of the weekend. It's all good. 707-654-4693. Do you see other guys on this Raiders defense that you think will be top 10 in their position? If so, tell me who you think it is. And then let's take it a step further. Do you think that they need to have multiple guys top 10 in their position for this Raiders defense to be as successful as we think it's going to be? I think it's going to be a upper echelon defense in the league. We know that it's going to lead the Raiders. That's how Antonio Pierce wants to hang his hat. He wants to win games by a strong defense, offense that obviously complements it. We want to have a really good run game, but it's all starting with the defense. This is going to be a very tough, strong-minded defensive team. Just like the Raiders beat the Chiefs on Christmas and only allowing them to score 14 points, that's the recipe the AP is looking at. Holding your opponent under 20 points and the Raiders getting around 24 points, they're going to win a lot of games. That's what he wants, right? So to have that, for that recipe to actually work, do the Raiders need to have multiple guys in the top 10 in their positions? Like we know Max, right? Does Christian Wilkins need to be top 10? Does Malcolm Koonce need to be top 10? Does Robert Spillane need to be a top 10 guy? Jack Jones, right? Jacorian Bennett, Nate Hobbs, Merrick, Epps. Merrick, if he comes up with more interceptions, he had 3 last year. If he comes up with 6 or 7 in a contract year, that's the other thing. The Raiders have a lot of guys in contract years on defense. Contract years always make guys play at a whole high level. So they might have multiple guys at top 10 positions in their respective position. They might, just because, again, contract years always bring the best out in everyone as they all want to get paid. So we'll see, but I would love to hear from you at 707-654-4693. Again, it's something that you can kind of think about over the course of the weekend. And, of course, on Monday, we'll have plenty of the conversation, and we'll talk about it and have it in the Locked On Raiders podcast voicemail line in segment number 3 of the show. Speaking of segment number 3, your calls and texts are coming up next here on today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start things off with a call from Steve 2.0 in Virginia. He's calling to talk about how he became a Raiders fan, Tom Brady, and what he thinks about him being involved with the Raiders, and also talks about the QBs. Serious Steve 2.0 in Virginia.
Hey, Q. This is Steve 2.0, now from Virginia. First-time caller. I've been listening to you for a little over a year, since early last summer. Just really enjoy your format. Really love the way that you kind of keep it family friendly and whatnot. Got 2 quick things. First off, why I became a Raider fan. I became a fan back in high school. I went to a small school in Paramount, California, and we had, in big bold letters, commitment to excellence on the locker room wall. Tried out for football, but I just wasn't really built for it. I was more of an individual sports guy. But my uncle took me to see a Raiders practice game at the Coliseum, and that was it. I was hooked. I was a fan. Next thing I wanted to ask you about is Brady. I know he wants to be a minority owner, and I know that there's not a whole lot of talk about this, at least from what I can hear on the podcast, and it looks like, according to the news, Fox is going to really restrict him in what he can do and his access to teams and et cetera if he does become a minority owner. Fine. My real problem, though, is with Pretty Boy himself. I mean, doesn't anybody remember the Tuck Rule game, I really associate him, and of course his previous coach, with that game and with the downfall of the Raiders. I just haven't really seen my team up since then. I may be wrong. Maybe there are times I'm forgetting, but I associate that game and him specifically with the downturn in my Raiders. And I really don't want to see him involved in any way with the Raiders. Just my opinion. Curious on your thoughts with it. On the Raiders quarterback situation, I was kind of an AOC guy. I realize we got who I call Spicoli now. I hope he does really well. That's all I got. Thanks to you for what you do. Go Raiders.
Steve, appreciate you, man. Thanks for the call. Good story on becoming a Raider fan. As far as Brady and the Tuck Rule go, I mean, that changed the history of the league, right? I mean, I was just talking about this in the barbershop the other day, a couple Saturdays ago. That's one of the biggest what-ifs in sports history, right? What if the Tuck Rule hadn't happened? You know, it's a lot of different, things that transpired after that. A lot of guys lost their jobs, right? That was Eric Allen's last game that he ever played, right? I mean, there was a lot of different things that happened, factors. John Gruden never coached for the Raiders again until John Gruden 2.0, but, he was traded after that. If they win that game, they end up in the Super Bowl. I don't think he gets traded, right? I mean, there's so many different things that happen after that. So that's probably one of the biggest what ifs. And again, like you said, it really started everything up for New England, and it really started to be the beginning of the end for the Silver and Black. And I know they had another successful season following that, but that was literally the end of what the Raiders had going on. So it was very unfortunate. As far as the quarterback goes, I just want this team to win, right? Whoever helps them win, I'm good with. Minshew's going to get the first crack at it. AP wants the team to start off fast, and that's why Minshew's there. So, boom, there you go. He said he's been focusing on the first quarter of the season. Of course, that is, the Chargers, the Ravens, the Panthers, and then, of course, the Cleveland Browns. So he's got to be able to make that happen, and, we'll see what happens. But you got to get off to a good start, and that's what AP is banking on. So we'll see what happens. But, Steve, it's good to hear from you, my man. Thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Raider Castro out the 661. Says, sup, Q? Raider Familia. It's Raider Castro out the East Bakersfield 661. With the release of Brandon Faison, what would be your pick for the Raiders as we should be looking for a vet defensive back now? Just my opinion. What's your thoughts? Stay up, Q, and Raider Familia. Yay! Raider Castro out. And he put a picture of best cornerback free agents 2024, Xavier Howard, Adoree Jackson, Patrick Peterson, J.C. Jackson, Akilo Witherspoon, Keon Crossan, Eli Apple, and Shandon Sullivan. And thanks so much for that. I do appreciate you. Xavier Howard has a lot going on off the field right now, so I would stay away from him. I've said it before. I don't know what his relationship is like with Patrick Graham. Adoree Jackson, I mean, he's okay, right? I mean, he could probably be a good depth piece if they want to bring a guy in. Patrick Peterson's a little bit long in the tooth. He is a solid guy. He played a lot of snaps last season for Pittsburgh, so maybe he's a guy that you consider. J.C. Jackson, I'm passing on him. There was a time where I was pounding the table for J.C., and then the Chargers signed him. Tom Telesco signed him, and he washed out. So I think that Tom Telesco is probably like, not going down that road again. Witherspoon, not really high on him. Crossan, I'm good. Eli Apple, hell no. Anyone who's listened to me knows I'm not an Eli Apple guy at all. So, Shandon Sullivan. I think, honestly, out of all those guys that you put up there, Adoree Jackson and Patrick Peterson would probably be the two that I have the most interest in, and probably Adoree because he's a little bit younger than Patrick P. But Patrick P. does bring that, veteran leadership, but he's also going to be the guy that wants to play a lot. And right now I don't see a spot for him to play. But thanks so much for that text. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Trucker Ken in Central Florida. He wants to call and ask about Tyreek McAllister and Amari Gaynor. Here he is, Trucker Ken in Central Florida.
Q. What's up, legends? This is Trucker Ken from Central Florida. I had a couple quick questions about the 53-man roster and get your opinion on a few of them. Amari Gaynor. Man, he looks special. Some of the highlights that I've been watching from him throughout his entire preseason run, he looks special. He looks big, fast, athletic, all over the field. So I'm curious to get your opinion on what you think is possible for this kid. I look at him as a starter at some point this year, and I don't think he'll give up his position. He's fast. Like I said, he's athletic, and, man, can he hit. I think we got a steal with him in the draft. and McAllister. He was another steal, I think. His kick returning might be something special to watch this year with the new kickoff rule. I think we're going to be able to take advantage of some of these teams that aren't really focusing on that aspect of the field. So anyway, wanted to get your opinion on these two guys specifically, but all in all, your general consensus with, them guys picking the 53-man roster. I think we're talented, and I think we're going to turn some heads this year. I think we're going to be good, and I honestly hope that we're consistent. Anyway, I'd like to get your opinion on it, and as always, love what you do. Go Raiders.
Ken, thanks for the call. Appreciate you, and I agree, man. Amari Gaynor looks the part. I'll tell you, if the Raiders let him get on the field in a defensive, situation, then he might not come off. He looks like one of those guys. Like, there's certain dudes that you can identify that you see them, that you know that they're so hungry and they've got the skill set and all they need is an opportunity. Once they step on the field, they're not coming off the field. I remember the story, and it's funny that I'm not even talking about football here, but when I was in Central Texas and I was covering Baylor, I remember Dee Richards. I was talking about women's basketball, the Lady Bears. Kim Mulkey was the coach, and Dee Richards was one of those players that, she was good, but she wasn't all that. But Coach Mulkey said as soon as they put her on the court, they couldn't get her off. Like, oh, no, they made the mistake. They put her on the court. They're not going to get her off. They did the same thing with Nina Davis. Nina Davis was that one. She was like, hey, I'm undersized. I shouldn't be dominating down here like this, but once you give me an opportunity to get on the court, I'm not coming off. Obviously, women's basketball in college is a lot different than the NFL, but same concept. Amari Gaynor, to me, looks like that guy. You put him on the field, he ain't coming off. So whoever, is in front of him, they better not get hurt. They better not, not play well, because once he gets his shot, like I said, I think he's going to be a special dude. McAllister, obviously he's got special ability. AP was talking about him on Thursday when we met with him. Sounds like he's probably going to be a punt returner and a kick returner. Seems like that he's going to get a lot of opportunities to make plays in the special teams game. So I'm really excited about that. Really worked on his craft in the CFL. And again, another guy that didn't mind working extra hard, going that extra step to get where he needed to be. He was a guy that was on the practice squad in Denver, right? So he's been in camps, training camps with teams in the NFL. Didn't make it. Took his game to the CFL and mastered his craft of being a kick returner. And you see how it paid off Friday night against the 49ers and caught everyone's attention. Now everyone's talking about Tyreek McAllister. So now the Raiders have a bona fide weapon back there that, again, sounds like he's going to be a guy in the punt return game and also the kick return game. Thanks so much for that call. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Cyrese. Said, Q, why do so many fans think Tyree would be better inside and point to quickness when his biggest issue is he's slow to get off and lacks any technique other than a bull rush? If it was that easy, Raiders defensive line coaches would have done that already. I get that he lacks bend to rush off the edge, but he was also getting stood up by guards in preseason. Athletically, his size and lengths are freakish, but that's it. Quickness, agility, and bend are way below average for an edge and are really hard to develop if you don't have it already. 6 to 12 months minimum of boxing, MMA, plus mobility training could help, but will it be enough? Tyree is a project, and it's hard to tell what he'll ever become in the NFL. It's from Cyrese. Thanks for the text. And look, I disagree slightly. AP actually, and if you go back and look at the end of last year, they put him inside, and he actually started playing better inside. I remember AP at the Combine telling us that that's where Justin Tuck, that's how he got acclimated to the NFL. They had to kick him inside, and he ended up being a guy that could dominate against the guards. And so there is a chance that Tyree does end up kicking inside. He might end up being that guy where he's better than guards, but he's not as good as edges, the tackles out there. So I understand what you're saying, where you're coming from, but AP has alluded to him playing on the inside, and that actually helped him out and got him more comfortable. So I could see him being that guy, and especially if he's, part of a rotation and a guy that, could play, obviously next to a guy like Christian Wilkins or coming in behind Jonathan Jenkins or whatever the case may be. Like, there's a role for him for sure. I just don't know what his best role in the league is yet. And clearly the Raiders haven't figured it out yet either, but they have him working inside and they have him working outside. At some point, they need to make a decision on what they really want him to be. But thanks for the text. I do appreciate you. And like I said, totally understand where you're coming from. Just got time for a couple more. Pete in the 818, he's calling to talk about the Tom Brady rules that the league has put in place, and if he, in fact, does become a minority owner of the team. Here he is, Pete in the 818.
What up, Q? This is Old Man Pete from the 818, listening to your show as always, and heard you bring up the topic of Tom Brady trying to be an owner with the Raiders, minority owner, and also trying to be an analyst with Fox. And, I thought about the take, and I'm not a Tom Brady fan, obviously a Raiders fan, but I got to thinking, would this be an issue if Tom was going to be an owner of another team? Does the NFL and their ownership club still got issues with the Raiders trying to do big things? So, I don't know. I really thought that it's kind of pointless that they're putting all these restrictions on Tom to the point where he can't even be in the production meetings, which are really harmless. I mean, it's basically having coffee with the coaches and having coffee with the players and chopping it up. If they're going to be that petty, it's pretty ridiculous that they would do that to their greatest player in the history of their game, who wants to be a part of the NFL in multiple ways. So just another instance of the NFL shooting themselves in the foot. I know that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that they got going on, but doing this to Tom, one of their greatest players, it is really petty that they would do something like this. Anyways, that's just my 2 cents on the topic. Keep up the good work.
Pete, thanks for the call. I appreciate you. And to be honest, I think the league would do that with anybody that was in that situation. They really don't want to compromise, and you could compromise it, just like Al Davis told Tom Jackson back in the day he couldn't cover the Raiders. He couldn't come to practice and check them out when he started working at ESPN. He said, why? Well, because you're going to go back and tell the Broncos what we're doing. You were a Bronco for 14 years. And he said, Al, I wouldn't do that. That would jeopardize my job, and that would my integrity, and that would ruin me. And he's like, hey, look, man, if you played for us for 14 years and you had an opportunity to go check on the Broncos, I'd expect you to come back and tell me, right? And so I think that every team would be cautious of that. As I mentioned on Thursday's show, I don't think that the league wants him to be associated with the Raiders either. And so I think that they're going to make sure, because they've been pushing this thing back a while from however much Mark Davis was trying to sell it to him for. They didn't like that. Then, of course, we've got this going on with the broadcasting. I think that he should go ahead and try his hand at broadcasting if he wants to do it. It's a lot of money out there, 10 years, $300-something million. And if he wants to come back and be a part owner of the Raiders, he can probably at any time. But I think he should probably pick one or the other, not try at the same time. But, Pete, thanks so much for that call. I do appreciate you. We'll close out with one text from Raider Tone in Brooklyn. Yo, Q, Raider Tone from Brooklyn, excited for the season to start. Was just listening to today's show and wanted to talk about the caller that mentioned our depth and a few calls that you've had on the last couple of days. I totally agree that it's not just at cornerback. We have depth issues at almost every position. I know AP did not want to practice with another team, but now I'm not sure if that was the best idea. I remember thinking then maybe our defense looks so great because our offense is so bad. That's why they did not look dominant in the preseason when playing against other competition, even when we left our starters in against second and third stringers. I don't want to be negative. I hope I'm wrong and everybody shows up when the lights get the brightest, but I can't say I'm not a little worried. Raider Nation for life. Let's go Raiders. That's Raider Tone in Brooklyn. And yeah, I mean, they're going to have to show up and show out. That's their job, right? I mean, they the defense looked very dominant in Costa Mesa. The Raiders offense didn't look very good at all. And, the one area, I think that the Raiders defense is fine. The only area that I'm concerned about is the run defense. And that's not something they could really work on in Costa Mesa. I mean, that literally was the biggest issue all preseason was the rush defense. And they can't really work on that in training camp because they're not tackling to the ground. So, hindsight's 2020. Maybe it would have been smart to go up against, another opponent so they can practice at least the rush defense and work on it. But then at the same time, I think as AP being a first-time head coach, it probably was smarter for him to do his own thing this year and then get back to some joint practices next year. But thanks so much for the text. It's great to hear from you. I do appreciate you. And that's going to do it for today's show. That's going to do it for the week. Now we jump into Labor Day weekend off my radio shows, both radio shows, ESPN and Raider Nation Radio 920 on Monday. So enjoy Labor Day weekend, Raider Nation. We will have a podcast on Monday. So no matter what you're doing, you can always tune in because, we're here every day. That's just how we roll on the Locked On Raiders podcast. But really, enjoy the weekend. It's the last weekend without NFL action. It's the last weekend without Raider action because next Sunday, not this Sunday, but next Sunday, we'll be talking about the Raiders and the Chargers. Game 1 of the season. So all next week we'll talk about, it'll be a game week. We'll be excited about it, fired up about it. And so buckle up, Raider Nation. It is here. So until Monday, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family, enjoy your Labor Day weekend. Please be safe out there. And as always, just win, baby.